Thank you all for joining us tonight. To those in the room and for those of you who are joining us on Zoom, welcome. I'm Dr. Beth Scheckler, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the second Wildcatalyst seminar of this series, which is our Hot Topics in Intellectual Property line that we're doing this fall. Our third and final seminar in the series will take place on November 21st, and we'll welcome Professor Tanya Evans of UNH Law to discuss the fascinating world of blockchain. So mark your calendars. We hope to see you then on November 21. If you're not currently on our mailing list and would like to get announcements about Catalyst, let me know, and I'll make sure that you are added. Tonight, we're especially pleased to have speakers who will talk to us about open access in scholarly publishing. UNH is celebrating Open Access Week, which I learned tonight is an international phenomenon and will be on my calendar henceforward. And that Open Access Week is under the leadership initiative from the Diamond Library, and a special shout out to Alita, who's here from Diamond tonight. There are several more open access events on campus this week, so check out the library's website if you're looking to find out more. Before I introduce our lovely speakers, I want to take a minute to thank our sponsors for their generous sponsorship of the Wildcatalyst seminar. Hamilton Brooks Smith Reynolds, a full-service IP law firm with offices in Concord and Boston, as well as Saunders and Silverstein, a boutique intellectual property firm specializing in copyrights and trademarks. Please be sure to visit our sponsor table before you depart today for some giveaways and more information about them. Now I'll introduce our three speakers for the evening, all joining us from the Copyright Clearance Center: Jennifer Goodrich, Christopher Harris, and Shannon Reville. Is that right, Reville? Okay, Reville. All right, I was close. Jen is the Director of Project Management at Copyright Clearance Center, where she leads development and evolution of CCC's transactional licensing services, as well as its RightsLink for scholarly communications platform. Jen has several decades of experience in trade, educational, and scholarly publishing, and has worked in all facets of the industry. Chris is legal counsel at CCC, and he works with product teams across all legal aspects of CCC's product integrations, partnerships, and creating content management systems for clients. Prior to his current role, Chris was my direct predecessor at UNHInnovation, and so we're really pleased to welcome him back this evening. And finally, Shannon Reville is an alumni of UNH's English and Journalism program, and now working as a product manager at CCC, focusing on development activities to bring new features and product enhancements to market, while also serving as the liaison between market-facing colleagues and the CCC software development team. So please welcome me and please join me in welcoming Jen, Chris, and Shannon.
Well, I'm going to start off the talking, but I will say I'm not going to talk much. I am the legal counsel at CCC, but my role is more as a generalist, and so I touch on OA, I touch on transactional services, I touch on basically everything that CCC does. To give you a little context of what CCC is, what Copyright Clearance Center is, it sounds like a publisher's clearinghouse, but I assure you, we don't offer contests. There's nothing to win. It started actually back in 1976 with the Copyright Act. There's a little provision in the Copyright Act that says that Congress shall establish an organization that handles rights licensing, and that is Copyright Clearance Center. In 1978, we started. And the first envelope came through the door. About 5 people were sitting around a table and said, what do we do with this? It came from a publisher and said, I'd like you to license the rights to my content to this person, and that's how it started. And so it was a very transactional business to start, and it was that way for the next 10 or so years. CCC has expanded in its nonprofit status to continue licensing, and has branched out to content management systems, which involves software licensing, which I'm involved with, and then also, of course, into the scientific, and by scientific we want to say broadly, the social sciences and the hard sciences. So we are a welcoming family. the content management systems, and then all of the aids to research, I might call it, that help researchers find content that they need more quickly. So you're talking about metadata systems that can scrub vast quantities of data and find that content more easily and get it to researchers so that they can find what they need to make their research happen. That's, in a nutshell, what CCC does. And like I said, I'm a sort of a generalist at CCC. I dabble in OA. I'm working on the background of certain agreements. For example, with Scholar One, you may have heard of. It's one of the platforms that help facilitate manuscript management, and CCC is involved with that in helping everyone process article processing charges, and so the whole back end of that. So the agreements related to that, that's what I deal with. But then I always defer to the experts, and that's why I invited Jen and Shannon to talk about this. So I'll be asking some questions here. We want to open it up to questions at any point during the conversation. I'll try to needle in some questions every once in a while, and just to keep the conversation going. And like I said, feel free to jump in. I'll hand it over.
Thank you. I'm Jen Goodrich, and I've been in the industry since I was an undergraduate, not at UNH, actually at Northwestern, but and I've spent my whole career in publishing, but the past maybe 6 years focused on open access. So I have quite a bit of experience working with publishers, working with research institutions, working with funding agencies. And we're not going to talk about our platform today, but what we do with our open access platform is we enable the payment of the article processing or article publication charges, and probably soon the book publication charges, for authors on behalf of publishers. And we create all of the communications between the funding bodies or the institutions funding those APCs and the publishers and the researchers. So what we thought we'd do today is just give you a, really, why are we talking about open access, right? Give you a little bit of context and the trends that we're seeing in this space. Discuss the emerging framework. So what's happening in the ecosystem that is causing a different kind of business model and relationship between publishers and institutions and researchers and funding bodies, and talk about some of the publishing considerations. So we're really curious to know how many of you in the room are researchers? Show of hands. Great. How many of you have published open access already? Fantastic. How many are librarians? Great. Research Management Office folks, do you have that, or is APC? Okay. And faculty? Okay. And students? Great. Okay. So we'll try and give a little bit to everybody, and definitely stop us along the way. Okay. So why are we talking about open access? Open access publishing and access to the data behind the research is of utmost importance to funders, research institutions, and researchers around the world. Part of that pressure is from the dire state of our planet and the growing number of critical issues we need to address together. So whether it's hunger, energy, climate change, disease, and part of that growing pressure is from the funders and government agencies demanding that the results of the research they fund be open and accessible outside of a paywall as soon as possible. So really it's to foster that collaboration, immediate access to the research, immediate access to the data behind the research, so that breakthroughs can happen more quickly, right? More solutions can happen more quickly. But open access isn't new. So this was developed by the Microbiology Society, and I thought it was a nice short timeline of the history of open access. And really, the Budapest Open Access Initiative was signed in 2001, the Berlin Declarations in 2003. Both of these initiatives were all about making peer-reviewed research open access to, and I quote, accelerate research enrich education, share the learning of the rich with the poor and the poor with the rich, make this literature as useful as it can be, and lay the foundation for uniting humanity in a common intellectual conversation and quest for knowledge. I think those still continue today. CCC has been bringing together many stakeholders in the industry, and the passion around those principles remains. There's a lot of conflict today because of the pressures of the funding agencies and the pressures on the traditional publishing models. But we'll show you a really great infographic at the end that was created in an event that we hosted in London about a week ago. And there's a lot of conflict, and we actually brought some handouts that, if you're interested, we mapped the ecosystem recently, and this map is hard to read here, but it's going online soon. And what we actually did is we mapped the various nodes of the publishing life cycle. And then for each node, we mapped key stakeholders. So the researchers, scientists, the institutions, the funders and government agencies, and the publishers of all kinds. What kind of activities they do, what kind of investments they make, what kind of rewards they get, what keeps them up at night, and who are the vendors and service providers supporting each around the node. And we did this because when we were bringing, stakeholders together, we found there wasn't common understanding of each other's roles and responsibilities and investments in the ecosystem, and there wasn't common language. So this is brand new. We just released this maybe 10 days ago. But it was one of our commitments as a service provider that we were making to try and help fuel the conversation. So I think you'll see a lot of what we talk about today are the pressures on the ecosystem, and it'll be really good to hear from all of you where you have questions around that. So let's just go back up for a second. So we had the Finch report in 2012. And then in 2018, we had the release of Plan S. Are you familiar with Plan S? Okay. So Plan S was released by Coalition S. The S stands for speed and shock. And it was all about trying to increase the speed of making scholarly research and the data behind it open access sooner. So all of the earlier declarations were about trying to have open access publishing be universal by 2020. Obviously, we're 2 months from 2020, and we're not there yet. So we're at about 28% if you look at all sort of scholarly journal publishing.
Yeah, so that 28%, I was going to bring up a point. Conversely, in some countries in Europe with particular publishers, I'm thinking Springer Nature, I know that with some countries, some of the authors that they have in place, the percentages are 73 to 90%. And so I was wondering, even though it's 20% writ large, there are clearly some hot pockets of activity with OA. And so where are those, and how does that relate to the United States?
So what does it actually count? I mean, does it only count open access through the publishers, or also, like we are mandated now by NSF, by NASA, that when we publish, I mean, even if it's not open access, that the manuscript, an early version of the manuscript, they cannot take the exact same, but an earlier version of the manuscript goes into a repository. I mean, that is for me open access.
It is.
Is that counted there, or is it not counted?
It depends on the number. So this number came from the 50th anniversary report of the STM Society, right? So I'm an association, so it's Scientific Technical Medical Association of Publishers. That is mostly about the journals that are in the directory of open access journals, okay? But like Chris said, the percent of open access just is all over the map, depending globally, the subject matter, whether it's books, whether it's journals, it just depends on the content.
And
so,
I think you made
yeah.
an important distinction between like the prior, sort of rough manuscript and what finally goes
The
to
preprint,
publication.
right.
I mean, there's
Yeah.
archive, that exists.
Yes,
I mean,
exactly.
in physics, there are some subdisciplines that do not publish in the commercial publishing anymore. They put
Absolutely.
everything just on archive that it is.
Yeah.
It's not peer reviewed, but that's fine with them.
Right.
And that is the quickest way to make progress, and
Yes.
that's where I see a lot of things going.
And I think there's good debate about that. I mean, there's a lot of repositories, there are a lot of hosting platforms, there are a lot of research management platforms that allow the sharing of early research and content and published articles. The traditional journals and books probably aren't going away anytime soon, but it's certainly manifesting in new ways, right? And the, what's that?
They want to survive, they want to continue making money. It's as simple as that.
Yes, and there's value, right, that the traditional publishers
What's the value?
create. So there's a whole bit of work that publishers do in curation, in facilitating peer review, in marketing, in dissemination. So that's why we did this, right? So that everybody can see what the different players do. You can certainly challenge any of it, right? Yeah. Yeah.
And I know what their interest is for sure. There's another graph that went around about a few years ago here at UNH,
Yeah.
from the library. I mean, from the physics. I don't know whether it came from the library or from the physics library. But that graph showed. Yeah, it might have. That graph showed the the ROI. I mean, the return on investment. For the publishers. Which is going up and which is at a level that even Apple could only dream of. They make an incredible amount of money of our publishing, of our work actually, because we do the peer review, not them.
Yes, I know, yes.
Right?
And that's probably a tier of publisher. And then you have small and mid-sized publishers, and you have society and learned society publishers. So the margins are not the same there.
This was for Elsevier, for the
Yes,
three big ones,
yes.
and Wiley.
And
We used to, in
Yes.
the geophysical sciences, we used to publish through the AGU, and
Yes.
they gave it away. They just traded it off to Wiley, and that's what
they were their
happens everywhere
publishing
now.
partner.
So the smaller, there will be only three
Yeah.
ones, so I don't think there are many in between anymore.
Well, that's the whole goal of Plan S and Coalition S. So they came together to try and make open access a reality much sooner, but they also had very strict rules, and they are promoting transparency and transformative agreements. So what they are doing is pushing the industry away from the subscription model to a pure open access model, so that the funds are used in ways that they feel are better for society, better for researchers. But it's a transition, right? Because if publishers are going to continue to provide value, if peer review is going to continue to exist the way it is, and it's evolving in many different ways, it's very hard to just flip a switch and not go out of business as a publisher, right?
Exactly. So who is behind Plan S?
Ah.
That sounds very suspicious to me.
So Plan S is all of these. So it was Science Europe behind it, Wellcome Trust, UK Research and Innovation. You've got the Research Council of Norway. You've got, did I say Wellcome? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There are many, many, many other funders and organizations. I'm sorry, say that again?
Is that the industry, the publishing industry?
No, these are the funding bodies. These are the funding bodies in Europe and the US and around the world. And they came together to say the move to open access is not fast enough. The movement away from subscription to open access isn't fast enough. And that's why they put Plan S out. And Plan S caused a huge uproar in the industry. Lots and lots of conversations and debate and meetings, because these were there are 10 principles, 10 key principles of Plan S. The most important ones are up here. So the research has to be, and the research articles has to be made open immediately. There can't be an embargo period. It has to be published under a CC BY license.
Everybody's familiar
Do you know
with
what a CC BY license is?
Question about it, or?
Exactly, I mean, yeah, it's a lot of legalese.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, the author is typically the owner of
So that's a Creative Commons?
yes,
Okay.
yes. And so under that particular license, what it is the author retains copyright ownership and then is licensing it out on the particular terms, which are a total of 4 pages, to say it's available.
Deal, how do you license it out? I mean, so far they always force us to sign an agreement, which we're basically giving all our rights away.
Yeah.
That's
So
good
if it's
way.
on a website, for example, you'll see the little logo, CC BY.
I mean, it's not that anymore, but I mean, there's got to be some restrictions in there, I suppose.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. And so so the BY
So
is
it's
the
a
attribute.
non-exclusive license then?
It is non-exclusive.
Okay.
Yep, that's right.
It can
Word
be used
here.
for commercial
Keep yourself.
purposes
Right,
and
right.
non-commercial purposes.
Right. And that BY just is the requirement, the largest requirement of the license, which is to say, you just need to give me credit for the fact that I'm the author. And so once you've done that, you've satisfied in this case, the biggest obligation of the license, and you're free to share it and distribute it and do other things. So.
Sometimes you'll see the CC BY NCND, the non-commercial, non-derivative. It's kind of maybe the second most popular license, but most are publishing under a CC BY. Okay. You'll see here the next point. They must be published, the research must be published in compliant open access journals or platforms. So it's either or. Grants can be used for financing the APCs. So when there's actually a charge to publish, a pay to publish, the research grant can be used to fund that. But yes.
Can you remind us what an APC is?
It goes by sort of 2 terms, either article processing charge or article publication charge.
Sometimes the same terms appear in the same contract. Those two. You're like,
Yeah.
"Wait a second." Yeah.
So, an APC might be $1,500, it might be $3,500, it could be $1,750, it could be all over the map depending on the journal and the exclusivity of the journal, the cost of producing the journal, that sort of thing. So those costs vary. For most publishers, an APC is not covering the cost of actually publishing the article, okay? And then Plan S also said, we'll support hybrid journals, not pure OA journals. So a hybrid journal is when both content can be published behind a subscription paywall or open access for a period of time, but only if the publisher is committed to going pure open access within a certain time frame. Okay. So really, Plan S has been a catalyst in the industry for enormous change, and Shannon's going to talk a little bit about that.
Yes. So, of course, there are a broad set of challenges among all the different stakeholders in this ecosystem, but as Beth said, I work directly with our clients, so I'm going to be talking today about the challenges that our clients face, which are publishers. So CCC currently supports about 30 publishers around the globe, mostly in the EU, the UK, and the US. And
as Jen said, there's a lot in here about what needs to happen, but there's not a lot in there about how the publishers can actually achieve it. So our clients have really focused their conversations with us about our software products around how we can help them support these agreements and the full transition to open access in a timely manner. And so automating that is really a big part of what we're doing right now. But it's not smooth sailing for publishers because they don't have a lot of guidance on that how. And as a result, we've heard some quotes that their institutional sales teams are a bit of the Wild West right now. So they're going out trying to make deals with universities or groups of universities and even at the country level. And no one deal is the same because there isn't a very great template on what a good agreement looks like today. So it's a little bit wild. And it's important that despite variances between these agreements that they're making from university to university or consortia to consortia, that we keep these costs of managing them low because, of course, their traditional ways of making money don't exist in this new world of full open access. So historically, publishers have made their money from traditional subscription models where universities like UNH pay a large fee to get access to their subscription-based content, and a provider like EBSCO allows them to view that content because they've paid for it. But in a full open access world, this subscription revenue doesn't exist. So this income is still a lot of publishers' bread and butter. So transforming into a full open access model is hard to imagine. But in a full open access model, the way that they're making their money rather than subscription fees is through the article processing charge or book processing charge, article publication charge, whatever they call it. And so like Jen was saying, this is really just instead of charging a reader to read or a university for their researchers to read, after an author or researcher submits their manuscript and is accepted for publication into a journal, they are asked by either the publisher themselves, some other vendor, or a vendor like CCC to come in and pay their article processing charge. For CCC, across our 30 publishers, this averages about $1,800 US per manuscript, but that, like Jen said, can vary significantly. And it's often paid by the researcher's institution or funding body, whoever might be funding the research.
Right, in
Go
the
ahead.
UK, there are often block grants made to institutions to use for APCs. Some of that may be shifting and going away as Europe is rethinking their funding structure.
Yeah, so I mean, we're hearing, like Jen said, from our clients that this APC isn't necessarily covering the full cost. So you can kind of imagine the competing priorities here between researcher, institution, and funder and publisher. Is there a question?
I wonder, is there any transparency or data around that statement about whether APCs are covering costs? Because that's
Yes, actually today there was an article published as part of Open Access Week. There's quite a bit out there. You'll see Outsell publish some research on this. You'll see things in Scholarly Kitchen. You'll see things, if you go to, and I have a list of resources at the end, if you go to the STM organization website and look at their report, happy to also work with you offline, but there's quite a bit of
analysis I looked at most recently said that most articles cost about $200 to $400 for processing. And that was a couple of years ago.
Depends on what you include.
And
Wiley throws at every
not for the APC, but for the actual processing. And then the rest
sure, but they throw, a huge party for all the editors, at the AGU, which costs probably $100,000 to bribe everybody and keep them nice and happy in the system. No, seriously.
I hear you.
And then they turn around, and then we have the editors' meetings, and then they come and put pressure. And basically try to undermine the academic process, by pushing the editors to accept as many as possible, Also, we had some issues with too many co-authors who never contributed to papers, that we tried to bring that down, on the editorial level, they were opposed to that.
And
Because the only thing that keeps the whole thing really running is the Hirsch Index. Without the Hirsch Index, they would all be out of business. You know what the Hirsch Index is?
I don't.
No, it's a number for a researcher that is the number of papers that you have published and that
yes.
have gotten at least
Yes.
H citations. You know,
Yes.
H index of 30 means I
Yeah.
have 30 papers that have been cited at least
Yes.
30 times. You know, that index is used for all promotions,
Yes.
for hires, for everything.
And
So
that-
just means it's in the whole publishing parish thing, right?
Yeah, sure. It's
And
a
that-
publishing parish,
yes.
but it is in a number now. You know, it is in a number.
That is shifting. So it's not quickly yet, but it's happening in Europe. It's happening with emerging vendors coming into the market, like Res Cognito. They're at an event a couple weeks ago, one of the UK institutions there, they had already overhauled their entire reward system for their staff and researchers, and it was much more holistic. It was about education, it was about publishing, it was about contributions back into the community. I think you're going to see more of that amplified. It's going to take time.
Yeah, but it is still
Yeah.
there. It is still there.
It is
Okay, so
there,
here-
and it's a
here's the
broken
problem, you know,
piece, right?
I cannot advise my students or postdocs, you know, not to publish in a fully peer-reviewed journal. You know, and at one point, I paid $5,300 to Nature, you know, to have it open
Yeah.
access. Okay, I myself, I mean, late in my career, you know, I don't give some RA, you know, I mean, I can publish anywhere I want.
Right.
You know, and that's what they're afraid of, you know, so that, and I'm sick and tired of paying these things, you know,
Yes,
it's ridiculous. And there was the question, you know, what is actually the cost, you know, I mean, yeah, what is the cost, you know? They will claim
Yes.
that it costs so much, I mean, to keep the review process going and all that. But the people who do really the work, you know, who are the editors, you know, who are the peer reviewers and all those, you know, they don't even get paid, so that's.
Yes.
So I just wanted to add a perspective from the research,
Please.
from a researcher perspective, that the APCs are a real hardship. So we had
Oh.
a grant that
Yeah.
Alexander works on that
Yeah.
was a $6 million grant. At the beginning, and it's really important work that we really want to get out, and so.
What area?
We thought that, we figured, well, there'll be maybe 100 publications that come out of this, and then, so at $3,000 a piece,
That's a
like
lot of money.
right?
It is a lot of money.
So it's a huge hardship, and other people, many times at the university, people ask me, they've got unfunded research that they really want to get out.
Yes.
It'd be really good for them and the institution, and then they can't, they're always like, do you have $2,000? And, you know, there is no, at an institution like UNH that doesn't exist.
And that's the
Or
reason.
maybe it's being difficult.
Yes.
Well, no,
I don't know, but-
it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
You're absolutely, and
Yeah.
a lot of times that's funded out of the library and we don't have that.
Yeah.
Right.
But I would mention that somewhere between 60 and 70% of open access journals don't actually have an APC. It's just the really high impact factor ones that people really want to publish in because of brand recognition.
Yeah, that's ultimately the reason why some of our sub-disciplines that don't publish in peer-reviewed journals anymore are exactly the ones that don't have funding.
Yeah.
I mean, the cosmologists, the string theorists, I
Exactly.
mean, those people, you know, work with pencil and paper, they usually don't have grants. And if they have grants, they need that money to support their graduate students. Or maybe
Yeah.
they usually don't even have summer salary now. I mean, you know, you and I mean, we have, you earn $1 million a year. You know, so
What
that's-
subject area or disciplines are you working in?
Engineering.
Engineering, yeah. And they're interesting. Yeah.
Interdisciplinary, it's like hard
Yeah.
to find.
Yes.
Can't answer that question.
And that, well, that's very much what came out in CCC and Outcell hosted an event in March in London, and then again just a couple weeks ago. And the whole flow of money was huge. The reward system was huge. The lack of funding was huge. The impact on the global South and the collaboration globally among researchers and not recognizing that, and how hard it is to comply with funder mandates when you've got researchers collaborating from around the world, that China is different than the United States, than Europe. There's huge awareness, and folks are starting to say, yeah, we've got to work together to try and solve these problems. They're kind of big problems, so they're not that easy to solve. But we're starting to see examples like at one of the UK universities where they've overhauled their reward system, and this is going to happen,
I mean,
right?
it already started with Google, because our library pays for Thompson, right? I mean, for the database, where
Yes.
we normally draw the
Yes.
text from, but
Right.
Google is actually even better at indexing than they are. I mean, in my
They
opinion.
include a broader
They
range
include
of
a broader
things.
thing,
Yeah.
in Thompson, I find papers on me not listed, Google, sometimes some not mine, But you can delete them, but I mean, still, this is it. I mean, and I don't think there's a solution to the conflict. This is war. I mean, I see this as war, and they do all kinds of shenanigans. I mean, the library knows that, because you cannot subscribe to individual journals. You have to, like the cable company, you have to subscribe to packages, So we
Yes.
cannot even say, well, we don't need that journal anymore. And they say, well, it's fine, we don't deliver it anymore, but we still pay the same price.
And that's where the transformative agreements are going to make a difference.
Can I just add one
think-
thing on?
yeah.
I appreciate Jimmy's perspective, and also, I have a hard stop at the end of this time, and I don't know how much material you guys are planning to go through or not, or maybe this is a good maybe this is a conversation we want to have, but I just want to.
Well, it's what conversation you want to have. I mean, we really want to talk about what you
Our
want to
honest
talk
objective
about.
was just to present some things about OA and just kind of talk about what the issues are. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
my
that.
next points are more or less exactly what you guys are all saying, which is that
Right on topic. Well done, everyone.
The priorities are obviously very competing, and it feels a little bit like war. I mean, researchers want to do their research and get published in reputable journals without major financial barriers, because they want to make great discoveries and help other researchers make great discoveries. Institutions and funders, they want the research that they funded to be available to do just that, and they also want publishers to honor the role that they play in the publishing life cycle by lowering the costs of access. And publishers, I mean, you said it, it's a business. They want to make money. They too also want to have reputable journals that they have the resources to do extensive peer review and have that brand recognition. So the priorities here are a bit all over the map. And what is happening in the market as a way to sort of get us to some compromise, I suppose, is the transformative agreement. And has anyone heard the term read and publish agreement, publish and read agreement? Okay, so what this is, I talked a couple slides ago about the standard subscription model, where publishers going out to institution or group of institutions, and the institution is purchasing a large package of subscription access to their content. A transformative agreement and a read and publish or publish and read agreement is where this is a big deal, that the money paid by the institution or group of institutions to the publisher covers read access to subscription-based content, and sometimes unlimited or sometimes limited APCs covered by the total agreement.
For the published
For the
piece.
published part. So there's
Right.
the read part and there's the published part. And
And-
so they're working this all into one lump sum deal.
Most institutions are asking this to be cost neutral. So they don't want the agreement to go up.
Yes.
In this transition, they're asking for it to be cost neutral. Obviously, there's lots of variations along the way, but I'm just going to make up a number. Let's say you paid $100,000 for subscription access to a bundle of journals. You signed in a transformative agreement with that same publisher. Your read access and your publish open access APC kind of coverage would be that same $100,000.
But are any
That's-
small
that's-
institutions doing that? I know California
Yep.
did the deal. I think Ohio, I was just visiting Ohio, and Ohio
Yeah.
First or something it's called, and all the libraries in Ohio together, that's
Yeah.
some serious
Right.
bargaining
Yeah.
power.
Well, even-
Did UNH do that?
So the discussion about the transformative agreements is often, at least from the open access advocate side, is we're a little worried that it's just funding the same players to do the same thing in a different way. And that if the bigger institutions agree to do this, then the smaller institutions become free riders, because they're not going to be able to sustain that kind of system over time. And that may make that fall apart at some point.
Reminds me of Adobe, right? I mean, you don't buy the software anymore. Now you have a subscription model for
Yeah.
the software.
Yes.
It's all marketing. It's all marketing. This is marketing battle, you know, I mean, Microsoft has done that. You may have read it, I mean, recently, I mean, all the big brokerages, they don't charge commissions anymore, you know, because they figured out a different way to
Right.
pull money's people to their side, you know, so that's what the publishers do, you know. And the publishers have problems, right? I mean, the first problem is technology. In the old days, you know, they were really needed, I mean, to do the typesetting and all that. They're not needed anymore. So, well, the other problem they have is what's called submarine journals. I mean, they are all of a sudden popping up, you know. I mean, you probably get the ads, right? I mean, publish in my journal, publish in my journal, you know, and they're often free. They're often free. I don't know how they make money, but I mean.
You mean some of the mega journals as well? Or is that what you're thinking
No,
about?
those are unknown journals. These are just
The individual journals?
new
Yeah.
journals. I mean,
Yeah.
they just pop up. You know, everybody
Yeah.
can found a journal. I mean, I
Yeah.
can start a journal.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
want to,
Well,
we
that's
can-
where,
Yeah, because I don't need a printing press anymore. You know, I don't need a printing press.
and sometimes that's where some of the resources are useful, like the DOAJ, the Directory of Open Access Journals, because it has been vetted. So there's, you can make sure
So-
something is legitimate.
And I just
Yeah.
on your question, Alita. So could you explain that a little more? You know, what that the larger institutions would fund this thing, and so everyone else would piggyback off of that, and the system would fall apart.
Some
So
of it is that, you know, at UNH, we don't have enough funds in these deals to turn them over and cover what the same rate of APCs that other institutions might. Some of the discussion around is that the bigger institutions will probably go first into these transformative agreements. And
only
they-
because they have the funds to do
because
it.
they have the funds.
Yeah, I mean, this is the California system that's doing it.
Right,
So
right.
it's
And with varying degrees of publishing across those institutions. Sorry. Yeah.
So the idea is if all of these bigger systems go and everything is from them, which is going to be the majority of the scholarship as well, is free, then a smaller institution, probably smaller than UNH, probably wouldn't be participating in those agreements at all. We would just get the benefit of them. And it may even be that some of us, if we have state status, might not even be allowed to participate
Wow.
in paying
Yeah.
those kinds of fees
Yeah.
when we could get it for free.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. This is a really,
it's complicated.
it's really complicated. Yeah, it is.
I don't envy you trying to explain.
How are we doing on explaining?
I
Are we
know.
doing okay?
Any
Okay.
points of clarity that need to be made, since we
In all
still have about 10
seriousness?
minutes?
Is this really happening now, or is this?
Yeah.
It really,
Yes.
really is. Our clients are coming to us in desperate need of ways to actually implement these deals that are coming to fruition. I mean,
Still make money.
well, I mean, we're
Well,
charging them too.
Well, you have a lot of society publishers, right, who are partially funded by their membership, partially funded by their publishing programs, partly funded by other things that they do, conferences or education or whatever it is. So it's going to vary, right?
They work at cost, right? I mean,
Yes,
the
and many of them are not,
Society
and
does
many of
that.
them are
I mean,
not
they
for profit,
publish like 50
right?
different journals, they do it
Yeah.
all themselves, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they did the print, and everything got cheaper because they don't have to print anymore. I mean, they used to.
Except for that you have now hosting platforms, and you have research management workflows, and you still have indexing, and you still have all these different things that you have to do. And that's why, again, we did this, because it's a really hard conversation to have without understanding.
the interaction of the pieces.
Yeah.
and the actual troubles that the other stakeholders are
And
having.
who's investing where. Now, is everything going to have to potentially change? Maybe, right? I mean, there's so much pressure on this ecosystem, and the term that kept coming out over and over again in London, and then I was at the Frankfurt Book Fair this past week, was the ecosystem is no longer fit for purpose. And the traditional players in the ecosystem are hoping that they can transform the ecosystem, and some big technology giant or somebody else isn't going to come in and throw the ecosystem into total disarray or chaos, or maybe solve it. I don't know. So this article that we brought some copies of, and we can send electronically, is it's called "The Scholarly Communications Ecosystem is Bracing for the Full Impact of the Digital Age." And this is the outcome of that London event that we hosted with publishers and institutions and funders and researchers. And it paints kind of a scary picture of what's to happen, and a call for action and leadership and that sort of thing. So if anybody's interested, there are copies here, and we can send them to you electronically as well with links to the various maps if you're interested. You don't have to,
There's a whole lot
but
of other things that
yeah.
are wrong with the entire publishing model. The publishing model is 100 years old.
Yes.
So we do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah.
We produce these papers, they're peer reviewed, they're considered to be the perfect science now, and it's all bullshit. Because, at least in my field, after 10 years, 90% of the papers are completely meaningless, like that. Some of them are meaningless, when they're published,
So does that mean you want to see a different kind of peer review?
Yeah,
Do you
not
want to
peer
see
review, there has to be,
transparent
I
peer
could
review?
imagine a system, we have something like Facebook for science, I publish it there, and people can comment on that.
Yes.
In a certain way.
It's called open peer
There is
review,
a
right?
model, for example, that solar physicists do that, what they have is a living review. So they have
Yes.
papers that are review papers, big
Yes.
100-page things, but they are edited all the time, people edit to that.
Many folks are looking at
Yeah.
all sorts of different ways of doing open peer review and sharing the comments, sharing the names of the reviewers, and all sorts of different things to make it more transparent and being able to build and actually react
Yeah, and more effective.
to the peer review comments and make sure there isn't bias
Yeah,
along
I think
the
that's
way.
really good. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
That movement, and because you always get those peer reviewers that you're just like, you would never say.
There is
that.
actually
You
an
know
art.
who you were.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
Where am I? I skipped ahead. Oh, I get. So we've had some really great conversation. This is great.
Yes.
The only thing I was going to say left in my part before we get to a couple other specifics was just the specifics of the CUP CDL deal. So in this read and publish agreement, or publish and read, however you want to call it, 60% of California's overall spend on Cambridge journals is used to support unlimited open access publishing. So it's more the publish side, which is a good mark. And the remainder is assigned to access and content that CUP has that is not OA. So that's where they're at, and that's what they're calling it, a read and publish deal in their contracts, but at CCC we kind of define the difference between read and publish and read, being that the first word is the larger. So we might call it a publish and read in our four walls, but they've published it as a read and publish deal.
So California's created a toolkit. They've got a blog post. They've got a lot of resources. They're trying to help other institutions figure out how to transform. There are a number of new organizations in the UK and in the US, especially for society publishers, who are trying to figure out how, again, creating toolkits for agreements and considerations, reporting templates, different ways to have more bargaining power with the institutions. There's quite a lot going on. If you go down one slide, the ESAC registry, this is a repository of transformative agreements. And if your researchers are being backed by Plan S and other funders who are requiring transparency around the agreement, the deals are actually logged in this repository, and you can see the basic financial and other aspects of those deals. So that is not a bad resource at all. You can imagine folks are a little bit sensitive about having that full transparency, but it's coming, and it's in these registries.
Gonna ask. Right.
It is.
So what
Yes.
kind of things are captured in these transparency requirements? And you've alluded to the challenges of that, but what are some of those challenges?
Well, you'll see here the number of publications, the effective dates, the license requirements. I think it says whether pure and hybrid are covered, but when you drill down, if you drill down onto the actual link for the details, you see many more. Not everybody's completely consistent about what they're reporting, but it's coming, and it's a movement, and every time I go there, there's more and more and more agreements in there by more and more publishers. So you see, here's ACS, American Chemical Society's deal with VSNU, right, in Europe. And here's their deal with Max Planck Digital Library, right?
The size refers to the number of publication titles?
Yes, because often the read and publish deals are looking at the previous year's number of publications that were published open access to try and get to the deal parameters for the published piece, okay? Here you'll see Cambridge and VSNU, Cambridge and CDL. Here's, I can't say that word, and their customer, but this is huge in Sweden, Germany, Austria, the Netherlands, Finland, and building in the US. Okay. We did just want to put a couple screens up here for those of you who haven't been through a submission workflow. This is a Scholar One submission system. We integrate with Scholar One. But as you're going through your initial submission and researchers are uploading their manuscripts and identifying their affiliations and identifying their co-authors and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
And identifying all that sort of information, they get to a certain part in the submission, the initial submission workflow for publishing preferences. And this is where they can actually see what the APCs or the publication fees are likely to be, and where they can make a choice, if there is a choice, to publish open access or subscription. And if you go to the next slide, you'll just see that they're trying to give lots of information to the authors up front. There's still lots of work being done to make this more streamlined. One of the nice things about read and publish agreements is many of them are not going to require the author to pay anything. It's going to be an automatic sort of transaction. We've actually created technology to support this, but there should be no action required of the researcher under many of these deals. Okay, that should be a nice removal of a burden there.
What about UNH setting up an open access server?
You can absolutely do that, right?
We have an institutional repository now, and we have the capability of making journals in it.
And what I mean is that just like the agencies require now, that
Yes.
we have a version of the paper,
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
the copyrighted version of
That's
the
exactly
of
what
the
we
publisher
have that.
we can,
Yes.
but that's not widely advertised.
Yeah, I tried, but
Right.
it's hard to get the word out, but we do have one. It's
Yes.
called the UNH Scholars Repository, and it's hosted by the library.
Okay.
Give me a call, I'll help you out.
Why don't you call it open access, that makes it,
It
much
has
more-
a lot of different types of content in it, but one of them is open access repository content.
Interesting.
Well, we would be doing Copyright Clearance Center a disservice and my development team if we didn't talk just for a second about the software that we're building to help support this effort. So like I said, our publishers are coming to us desperate for help trying to implement deals like this. And so you saw in the ESAC grid the different parameters that may be at play from deal to deal, and they vary quite significantly from deal to deal. So CCC has created a workflow where once we get manuscript data from a submission system or some other publisher system, we can actually identify if there's a deal in place and really streamline the researcher experience in actually requesting funding directly from the funder with which that agreement is, or institution with which that agreement is. And like Jen alluded to, coming very soon, our next release, which I'm very excited about, we are doing a workflow that takes the researcher out of that funding process entirely. So that's an option that the publisher can go for, which is being mandated by a lot of their institutional partners that, I don't want you to contact my researchers, I want you to come directly to me if a manuscript is affiliated with my institution, because that's not the researcher's job. The researcher's job is to do the research. So we're really excited about that, and this is just a screenshot of one of our systems where the researcher does go through, and we've identified a match for funding. So rather than going through to pay the article processing charge themselves, they can seek funding directly from their university. And this is kind of cutting edge in our wild field. So any questions? Or if anybody has ever, if anyone is a researcher and has submitted any sort of APCs through CCC, I would love to hear from you, or if you know of anyone who has, that'd be great. Okay, so we have another slide here just to wrap up, but we're close to time. We've kind of covered this. So is there anything else that we haven't covered that you guys were hoping to hear out of this session just before we close?
It looks like you had a question, Alita, but that was about 10 minutes ago. So.
Yeah, I didn't want to disturb the flow of things too much. But I think at that time what I was going to say is that one of the things that a lot of people are talking about is transforming the tenure and promotion requirements. I see you nodding, I know you've heard this, yeah. And MIT has a great report that they just released earlier this week that has advice around that from their open access task force that I think would be good for us to look at.
How would UNH attack that? Like where in the where would that?
What MIT suggested in their report is that the provost contact all of their departments and give them the responsibility of coming up with discipline appropriate ways of making their P&T process more open. And then they had a list of points. Some of it was adopting other methods or other metrics. Some of it was, I can't remember. There were half a dozen points at least.
Yeah.
But that report just came out a couple of days ago.
Fantastic. I'll
so
go find
not
that.
a lot of people are probably reading it yet.
Yeah.
But I've been sending around snippets of it. And I think
It's
it's
exciting,
Yeah.
right? It's really
At
exciting.
UNH, the provost office publishes the promotion and tenure guidelines.
Yeah.
They say nothing about age number. This is all ingrained, I mean, in us, in the faculty, that's because it's the only, and it's been heavily criticized for many reasons, not just because of the publishing issues, but also, I mean, some areas, you have papers, I mean, they have 100 authors, because of the big collaborations, who do you credit, how do you count those, who do you credit, and whatnot.
Yeah.
So we had all these issues already. I mean, that's clear, but it is the easiest thing because you have that number, you have that number. So you're looking at a candidate, who has a very low age, and you wonder, and is there something wrong with him?
Right.
But I can tell you that one of the latest Nobel laureates, his age number is 4, I mean, the Higgs boson, he wrote that one famous paper and that was it, And Einstein's number was calculated and that wouldn't have been very high either. So, I mean, it is not a good thing, I mean, to rely on that, It's some sort of a guide, I mean, you see someone with an age number 50, you know that at least he's a very busy person, No, I know, productive, that's what a nurse said, I mean,
exactly.
You can then calculate the M number, which is the H number divided by your years since PhD, and so that paper says, an M number of 1 that indicates a productive scientist. But it is different from field to field.
Yes.
But there's nothing here that says, I mean, we have to use the H number. Nowhere it is.
Right.
It's all up to us. We can, and every department does have, I mean, specific rules as well. How they do promotion and tenure and hire. Don't forget
That seems
Hire.
fortunate and very different than other parts of the world, actually.
You think so?
Yes, because in the UK, there's much more of a sort of overarching structure that the universities have to comply with. China is certainly very different in many ways.
Making decisions, you got to be careful. What you wish for.
Yeah.
Yeah, speaking of that, with requirements, I had read a article about Italy. They had passed a law in 2010 stating that for academics you have to have a certain number of citations now, and now they're experiencing this epidemic of self-citations or club citations, as if their buddies going, hey, you cite me, I'll cite you.
Yes.
Because now they've created that system that's encouraging that. Now they're like, well, what do we do now?
Well, there's some new tools that can show the web of the folks who have cited you and what you've done and create much more transparency around that and who's doing what. And supposedly, based on a lot of figures we've heard recently, open access content is cited a lot more than
exactly what I talked about.
And
JGR, you have these papers now with 30 or 40 co-authors, And I make it a sport, to go some of these co-authors, at a meeting and say, well, I just read your paper, you're a co-author there. Can you explain this and this to me? They become very nervous then, because they often haven't even read the paper, So, and we tried to eliminate that, as editors, and Wiley was undermining that, they didn't want that, I mean, because it generates more citations, I mean, it's good for their business ultimately.
Yeah.
So.
And also too, then if that paper gets retracted, you're just ruining more careers that way.
Yes.
Another story. We had a graduate student. I mean, she graduated. She's now working in Colorado, and I talked with her. So she's been in the business for 2 years, and she was complaining that there are all these people on the paper, and she continued, and she didn't even become a co-author. So I told her, hey, go to your boss, and tell him, to put you on as a co-author. At least you did something for the paper. Yeah, now she's moving up there very quickly. Yeah, that's. No, this is what can be very cynical about this.
Yeah.
This is publish or perish. I mean, that's been around for a long time. But,
I know.
But it's really becoming. I mean,
yes.
Making or destroying careers.
There's a lot that has to change, for sure.
This is a fabulously lively discussion, which I am not trying to short circuit in any way. So I just want to take a minute, if we could just thank our presenters for their lovely comments tonight, and invite you all out to enjoy some food and beverage and to continue the conversation. Please stay with us for a little bit longer. Thanks, everybody.